Hey everyone, this is a Dead by Daylight offering tier list, which is something I would argue is largely somewhat pointless as most of the offerings are pretty pointless and generally don't have an effect on the game. Typically it's best to just run a BP multiplier and be done with it, but hey, I thought why not? We're going to be ranking the offerings and placing them into one of four tiers. Our first tier is called Pointless Garbage, our second tier is called Mildly Useful, our third, Nice to Have, and our final, Actually Good. First off, in Pointless Garbage we have Shroud of Separation. The Shroud of Separation is probably one of the better offerings as it guarantees that all survivors spawn apart. At least this would be good if it wasn't an offering exclusive to Killer. This is just awful for Killer because splitting the survivors up is just basically removing as much possible pressure extremely early on in the game. If all the survivors are spread out, they could all possibly be on a gen within the first few seconds of the game. This offering really is not beneficial at all, to be honest. And next up we have all of the personal luck offerings. Luck in Dead by Daylight is one of the most pointless effects that does barely anything. Its only real effect being a slight increased chance to unhooking yourself, which is restricted to one time per game. Luck no longer applies to Trapper's traps either, so it's literally just a slightly better chance to unhook yourself. Not worth running, I don't think, especially when it comes to the personal luck offerings that will only apply to you. These are the worst survivor offerings in the game in my opinion, and marginally increase your chance of unhooking yourself, which is generally just a bad idea and broadly hurts gameplay anyway. Next up we have the different regents. All of the regents aside the purple are honestly just kind of useless. If you're gonna run a regent, you may as well just run a purple. It already does very little, but everything below purple is just kinda garbage, and makes barely any difference to the trials and how they play out, only making the fog a bit darker and slightly changing some visibility and sightlines. Okay, now moving up a tier to Mildly Useful. The Cypress Mori is an offering that lets you kill the last remaining survivor in the trial by your own hand. This one is really just a fun offering and doesn't offer any advantage really. It's sometimes more useful to use this to trick the survivors into thinking you have a better Morion. Next we have all of the 50% personal category offerings. Now, it's true that you may as well run something for extra BP, but the extra 50% in a singular category can often be very underwhelming as a boost. This is even more noticeable for categories that typically you won't fill, such as Survival, for survivors. Again, I guess you could consider them useful to some extent, but I think the vast majority of players have at least got the slightly higher percentage offerings, which feel a bit more substantial and worthwhile. Running these kinda makes you feel like you're increasing something, but you're often really not doing too much. And at most, you're going to gain an extra 4000 BP. But hey, I guess it's something. Next up we have the Purple Region. The Purple Regions are going to be placed here too as they provide the highest differentiation for the fog and its darkness, making them a bit more useful than the lower rarity of offerings. These aren't that great, but like the chest offerings, they at least visibly change the trial to some degree, and in some pretty rare cases they can either help you stay hidden from a killer or allow you to sneak up on a survivor with blocked visibility. So, you know, it can help sometimes, but I still think these are broadly pretty useless. Next up we have the 75% and 100% personal category offerings. These just aren't too great because they rely on you doing well in a specific category again. However, their percentage gains are enough for it to feel worthwhile if you do well in this category. For easy to fill categories like Objective or Boldness for Survivor or Brutality for Killer, this can be a guaranteed extra 8k or so in BP each game. However, these still aren't amazing just because they are restricted to a singular category, but again, extra BP, so at least it actually does something. The Sacrificial Ward is an offering that will stop any map offering burned in the same game from working. This is nice and can help you stop any maps that you don't want to play. At the same time, the majority of the time you'll use this and there won't be a map offering, so it has some times when it can come in handy, blocking Haddonfield or something, but there's tons of times when you'll play this for literally no reason. Oh yeah, and also if a team really wants a certain map, they can get it regardless of this if they play 4 offerings of the same map. It overrides the Sacrificial Ward. So basically the people who are using it most, the Survive with Friends groups, can basically guarantee a map regardless, even if you try to block their attempts. But again, there is some usage, so I don't think it's entirely pointless. Next up we have all the Shared Luck offerings. Shared Luck offerings are a bit higher, these being offerings that apply the luck effects to all players in the trial, ranging from 2% to 4% increases to luck for all players, which can be stackable. The highest percentage gain of luck, in Vigo's Jar of Salty Lips, I would consider as mildly useful useful and actually somewhat good if you have 4 people running this especially. This will double your chances from a 4% chance of unhooking yourself to an 8% chance, and again this applies to all players. So as unlikely as it is to work, it's double the chance, so it could end up saving the game in some pretty dire situations. Broadly though, luck is still a very pointless mechanic currently until it's reworked. However, there are unique scenarios where this can work. If a team runs 4 luck offerings and they also bring different luck perks along, you can actually get a pretty good build going. The Scratch Coin and Tarnish Coin are the respective add-ons for Survivor and Killers that will add a single chest or remove a single chest from a trial. Chests are generally just a waste of time, especially when you can just bring in an item of choice, and also that most chest items aren't great without dedicated chest perks. This offering also isn't completely pointless though, because it does at least do something that visibly changes the trial to some degree, and can affect the match somewhat, sometimes in relatively major ways under unique circumstances. Moldy Oak, Rotten Oak, and Putrid Oak are 3 killer offerings that reduce the distance between hooks. This sounds great in theory, but in reality, I believe the changes scale between 1.5 meters to 2.5 meters in decreased distance. Again, this sounds like a decent amount to be making the hooks closer by, but generally not only is this not needed, but it also really will not change the map layout that substantially, and often you will not see much of a difference. It's a nice idea, but it's got a weak effect due to it being just an offering, and it realistically doesn't do much. Especially as broadly there will always be about 2 hooks close to you anyway, so even if one breaks you can get to the other one quite easily. Petrified Oak is the Survivor version of these hook distance altering offerings. This offering makes the hooks 2.5 meters further away than usual. Again, this is a nice idea, but typically a killer will have an abundance of hooks to still put you on regardless, and typically there will be at least 2 in the vicinity when you are downed by them. So the extra distance can be pretty trivial. However, this one is a little higher, as this can help very slightly when in a Survive with Friends, especially with builds surrounding wiggle saves and hook sabotaging. Next up we have the Shroud of Binding. The Shroud of Binding offering will spawn all survivors in a trial together, allowing you to potentially all immediately get on a generator and pop one. Now, the better thing to have generally is to be spread out, but it can be nice to also all spawn together and spread out from there, especially if you aren't playing with comms as a survivor. However, I would argue this offering has a mostly negative effect for survivors, as it can mean that the killer can find all of you immediately, which isn't the best. So this can give the killer immediate and considerable pressure, but it can also be kinda nice, especially on maps you're more unfamiliar with. It really depends, to be honest, on the team and other factors like that, but I think it does have scenarios that can make it useful, so I'm putting it here. Finally in this tier we have the Sealed Envelope and Hollow Shell, which give you 25% BP gains to all categories as Survivor and Killer respectively. This effect being personal and so only applying to yourself. Yep, this is nice and applies enough extra BP all round to make it worthwhile, but it still doesn't do enough to say it's good, I would say. It's enough to definitely use though. So here it is. Onto the nice to have tier. Black Ward and White Ward are respectively Killer and Survivor offerings that will protect the items and add-ons that you bring into a trial, allowing you to keep them even if you die as a survivor and when the game is complete as a killer. This means you can bring in good stuff and protect it basically. You can generally get enough good stuff that these aren't necessary, but if you do end up running out or you want to preserve your items and add-ons, then these are nice to have. They do what they say on the tin and can actually be useful if you're running low on something, or there's a certain add-on that you love to run as killer but you don't have much of. Vigo Shroud is an offering that spawns you as far away from the killer as possible. This is debatably good, as most killers would go immediately to the opposite end of a map anyway, but it can be nice just knowing at the start of the game that you're definitely as far away as possible from the killer and you can get a head start. There's no need to run this really, but when you do, it's kinda nice and a worthwhile little bonus, I would say. The Shiny Coin adds 2 chests to the trial, and the Cut Coin removes 2 chests from the trial. Chests don't make too much of an effect on the game, but these are offerings that exemplify the idea of nice to have. It's a nice little bonus, or alternatively a small reduction to the survivors. I'm sure it won't completely change the game, but it does something mildly useful. As survivors, these extra chests could provide you with something like a key, or potentially a good medkit when in need, and as a killer you're just basically doing the counter of this and making these things less likely to find. So it does something and at least has a direct effect on gameplay. The Bound Envelope gives all survivors in the trial a 25% boost to BP gains in all categories. This is just a bit better than the personal offerings of the same amount, as it applies to all survivors and not just yourself. Again, BP offerings are great due to just how grindy DBD is, and this is a substantial enough of an increase to BP gains to definitely be worthwhile. Also, it's nice to just share it with your teammates too. The Shroud of Union allows you to spawn with one other survivor as a guarantee. This is pretty nice, as it just means you can likely shred out a gen quickly at the start of the match with another teammate, but it also means that 2 other teammates are going to be elsewhere on other generators, which is ideal. Having 2 people is generally the most you'll need on gens early on, I'd say, so you can somewhat guarantee that you'll get a gen done quickly before moving on. Typically you'll spawn with someone anyway, but this is just just a nice guarantee, and I would say is actually quite good. The Ivory and Ebony Moris as of recent have become kinda pointless. Moris now only allow you to kill a survivor once they have been hooked twice, meaning they're on their final hook anyway. The only benefit of this is to potentially circumvent anti-tunnel perks, but that's it. Maybe I'm underrating these, but I think Moris now are incredibly useless and really don't offer much of an advantage. They are really fun now though, and they don't feel as toxic anymore because they don't take much away from the game by running one other than maybe scaring the survivors a bit. But you know, nice to have still, especially when it comes to circumventing anti-tunnel perks, if you're into that kind of thing. The Ebony is a little higher than the Ivory. Now we're into the actually good stuff. First off, we have the Bloodied Blueprint and Torn Blueprint. Bloodied Blueprint will reveal the basement hooks to you at the start of the game and guarantee the basement spawns in Killer Shack. Torn Blueprint will also reveal the basement hooks, but will instead guarantee the basement spawns in the main building. This is a very simple change, but it's something that does actually directly affect the game and allow you to have some slight control over how the map spawns, which, you know, as a killer is pretty nice to have considering DBD is built entirely around random tile generation. It's a small thing, but it does what it says and provides you with an option over how a map spawns, which I think is quite good. Next we have the Escape Cake and Survivor Pudding. The Escape Cake will give you 100% BP gains to all categories in a trial as a survivor, and Survivor Pudding will do the same but as a killer. Both of these offerings are great and will really help to reduce DBD's endless grind by doubling your BP for a game and allowing you to make some much more substantial gains than you usually would. The only downside to this is that it does only apply to you and not to other players, but still it's a really nice bonus to have. Next we have Annotated Blueprint and Vigo's Blueprint. Annotated Blueprint will let you guarantee the hatch spawns in Killer Shack, and Vigo's Blueprint guarantees the hatch spawns in the main building. These two offerings I consider actually good because they have a direct and guaranteed effect on gameplay, allowing you to basically choose where to spawn the hatch. This offering can benefit both sides, but I also think it's pretty balanced in that way, maybe even making the hatch more balanced as a whole, by notifying both sides of its location prior to starting the game. This is also kind of a lifesaver for maps like Swamp, where the hatch is often very hard to find. The best offerings in the game in my opinion are quite simply the BP offerings that apply 100% bonuses or more to all players, to all categories or forms of BP gain, including the Party Streamers, Gruesome Gâteau, Ghastly Gâteau, and Sacrificial Cake. These are the highest level of BP offering, which also stack with other people's similar offerings, allowing you to multiply your BP gains exponentially. Party Streamers are the standard 100% gains, earnable all year round through the Bloodweb. The Gruesome Gâteau gives 103% gains and was earnable only during the year 3 anniversary event. The Ghastly Gâteau gives 104% gains and was earnable only during the year 4 anniversary event. And finally, the Sacrificial Cake gives 105% gains and was only earnable during the year 5 anniversary event. All of these are stackable with one another and apply to all players in a trial. You're always going to need BP, and these are the best way to get it. Alright, so now let's quickly go over the map offerings. These I want to rank separately because obviously some maps are good for survivors and others are good for killers. So, survivors, pointless garbage tier. Hawkins, or the Hawkins National Laboratory ID, and Midwich, or Mary's Letter. Mildly useful, Dead Dog Saloon, or the Dusty Noose, The Game, or the Jigsaw Piece, Larry's Memorial Institute, or the Shattered Glasses, Backwater Swamp, or Grandma's Cookbook, Yamaoka Estate, or the Yamaoka Family Crest, Nice to Have Tier, Autohaven Wreckers, or the Azarov's Key, Macmillan Estate, or Macmillan's Phalanx Bone, Protosprent Asylum, or the Charred Wedding Photograph, Coldwind Farm, or the Hard Locket, Ormond, or the Damaged Photo. Finally, actually good, we have Haddonfield with Destroyed Realty Key, Badham Preschool, the Pied Piper, Red Forest, the Last Mask. And for killers, the pointless garbage tier. Haddonfield, or the Destroyed Realty Key, Badham Preschool, or the Pied Piper, Red Forest, or the Last Mask, the mildly useful tier, Autohaven Wreckers, or Azarov's Key, Protosprent Asylum, or the Charred Wedding Photograph, Yamaoka Estate, or the Yamaoka Family Crest, Coldwind Farm, or the Hard Docket, Ormond, or the Damaged Photo. In the Nice to Have tier, Dead Dog Saloon, or the Dusty Noose, The Game, or Jigsaw Piece, Larry's Memorial Institute, or Shattered Glasses, Backwater Swamp, or Grandma's Cookbook, Macmillan Estate, or Macmillan's Phalanx Bone. In the actually good tier, we have Midwich, or Mary's Letter, Hawkins, or Hawkins National Laboratory ID. Alright, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and as always, do drop your own ranking down below for each of these offerings. Thanks, and goodbye.